We begin this morning with President Biden's trip to the Northeast to tour the devastation brought by Ida.
The president approved a major disaster declaration in New York and New Jersey, which clears the way for federal aid to hard-hit areas. At least 50 people across the Northeast were killed by the storm. NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber is on the ground in Manville, New Jersey. That is President Biden's first stop today. So, Ellison, set the scene. What is it like for residents there right now?
It's rubble as far as the eye can see. When the sun starts to come up, people come out starting to pick up what they've been doing the last couple of days, trying to clean up, go through what is left of their home, their memories, their Christmas lights, children's toys. And for many people, they are then trying to figure out how and if they will rebuild and where they will go in the meantime. Listen to what one resident told us.
It's very stressful, very, very stressful, because now you got to think, where am I going to come up with the money to try to repair it? Because insurance companies, they don't like to pay out. They'll say it's an act of God, you know, or something. They'll come up with an excuse. And now you're fighting with the insurance company for months on months while your house is sitting there and you have no place to live. Because if you don't have family here, where do you go?
And of course, this storm, it didn't just destroy people's physical items, memories. It took a lot of lives as well. In New Jersey alone, at least 27 people have died because of this storm. And Joe, 4 people are still missing.
So, Ellison, just on Friday, President Biden was on the ground in Louisiana looking at the storm damage there. What will we see during the president's visit there today?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe this will be the second time he has gone to visit a major disaster area because of Hurricane Ida in less than a week. He is going to start here in Manville, New Jersey. We expect him to talk about infrastructure and the need for Congress to act in regards to infrastructure, much like he did in Louisiana. He'll begin his day here, and then he'll head to New York, to Queens, New York, where he'll visit hard-hit neighborhoods there, as well as meet with local leaders.
And Ellison, as we just heard, there's concerns about insurance. In the meantime, FEMA approved a major disaster declaration for 6 counties hit hard by the storm. What kind of relief does that provide for residents, especially right away?
So it's financial aid primarily. It can, among other things, it can cover loans for temporary housing as well as home repairs. It really does touch on a host of things, but the big issue there is it is financial relief. And as you said, right now, it only covers 6 counties. The governor of this state says that they are in talks with FEMA. They are working with FEMA to try to get additional counties added to that. They're also telling people that they can go ahead and go to FEMA assistance, disasterassistance.gov to apply for that FEMA aid. If you're living in those 6 counties, for people outside of those counties, the governor is asking everyone to go to nj.gov/Ida to go ahead and register if they have been impacted by this storm so that they can try and get people aid as quickly as possible, particularly if that declaration expands beyond those 6 counties, as local officials hope it will.
All right,
Joe.
Ellison Barber reporting from a community that offers just a sample of the destruction throughout the area. Ellison, thank you.
As the Northeast reels from historic flooding, hundreds of thousands in Louisiana are still without power from the storm, which made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now from Metairie, Louisiana. Josh, good morning. So first, just tell us, what's the situation like there where you are in Louisiana?
Day by day, Savannah, the power is slowly creeping back, with the largest utility here in Louisiana saying they've now got 51% of their customers who had lost power back online. And you can start to see some of the recovery effort shifting into a new stage. As of today, in several of the parishes in the area, they're going to start debris collection. So basically, everybody who has had stuff in their homes damaged, pieces of their homes falling off, have basically put it not in the street, but right at the end of their yards, lining the street. And now trucks are going to start to come by and remove, essentially the debris of people's lives and allow them to start moving on there. You're also starting to see more folks try to cover up patched areas with these blue tarps, kind of like this one you can see behind me here. We were here just a couple days ago, and this massive hole in this shopping center was totally exposed. Now they've put that blue tarp over it. And in fact, that'll be an option for homeowners as well. It's the Blue Roof program you might have remembered from Katrina and other disasters, and it's actually run by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They will be offering that free service to folks here in Louisiana.
And Josh, schools in Jefferson Parish are closed for the rest of the week. I mean, when do we think schools are going to reopen? What impact is this having on students and their families?
School is closed until further notice, at least the end of this week. And in fact, schools around here, most of them had started back last month. And so this is actually a break several weeks into the school year. And that's creating new challenges, obviously, for parents, because as the power is coming back, more and more people are expected to go back to work. But of course, they now have to face childcare issues as well, Savannah.
And Josh, one of these other heartbreaking things that we're hearing about are fatalities at nursing homes. State health officials announced they evacuated residents from 8 senior living facilities because of these unsafe conditions after the storm and finding several people who did not make it. What are city officials saying now about that?
Well, city officials say that they discovered these deaths and this situation as they were doing wellness checks on what are essentially independent apartments for seniors with some assistance there. They deemed those conditions unsafe, and this came after they also had more than 800 people from nursing homes here in the area who during Ida were brought to essentially a warehouse that turned out to be in the hardest hit area, or one of the hardest hit areas. They were living in squalor, several deaths, and officials had to find other places for them to go. And you know, Savannah, you expect in any hurricane there's going to be some destruction, possibly even death, but this is just totally avoidable.
Absolutely. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions that family members want answered. Josh Letterman, thank you so much for your reporting.
It's the start of the new school year, and concern is growing that in-person classes could lead to a surge in COVID cases among students. In Detroit, they've launched an ambitious COVID safety program aimed at preventing just that. Among the guidelines, they're aiming to conduct weekly COVID testing on all 40,000 students, as well as faculty and staff. Plus, they're making masks mandatory, and they overhaul the ventilation systems in schools. NBC News correspondent Heidi Prisbilla is outside Priest Elementary School in Detroit with all the details. So, Heidi, today's the first day of school in Detroit. How does this ambitious COVID safety program work? What are folks saying about it?
Yeah, Joe, this is one of the most chronically underfunded, underserved districts in the entire country. And yet they are trying to pull off a very ambitious program here. It started last week, bringing both students and staff back into these buildings where they will have actual testing clinics set up in the buildings. They will have designated times for both student and staff once a week. When they come into the building, take their test within 24 to 48 hours, they will have the results. And school officials here think this will make a huge difference in taking out those students and staff who may be showing positive before they infect the rest of their class, the rest of the school. Here's what school officials had to say.
Oftentimes, Detroit Public Schools Community District is, from our perspective, particularly in the context of Detroit, where only about 40% of our city's population is vaccinated, we see this as really no other option.
And as we know, Joe, you can be asymptomatic and spread this to the entire class before people even know it or show any symptoms. So the question really is not why is Detroit doing this? It's why aren't so many other districts doing this, Joe? We've talked with members of Congress. They said we gave $10 billion for schools across the country to be doing testing programs like this. The CDC says they should be doing testing programs like this. So Detroit proving itself that against the odds, it can be a leader in this area.
Yeah, and as you point out, Detroit's doing this even though it faces a number of challenges, including financial ones. What are the biggest issues facing Detroit schools, and how does the district plan to solve some of those issues while still balancing all these COVID concerns?
Right, they've long had inequitable funding here, Joe, and the results of that with COVID were really devastating. About 30% of kids not even coming to class. And that's why they say they really cannot afford to have a repeat of that. They need to keep children in these buildings. And that is why they are doing this. They have some ideas because the answer is that they really don't know how many of those kids are actually coming back, whether overcrowding is going to be an issue again. So here are their ideas.
We will be providing the teacher with more pay based on having more students above that limit. If teachers are uncomfortable with the number in their classroom, then we'll create another section or hire another teacher, or another teacher is ready to be hired and brought to the school to reduce class size. We're not anticipating that being a challenge, because we also have to look at not only roster, but the actual number of students that attend and attend regularly. So all of that will be balanced.
Again, Joe, in a district with so much stacked against it, if Detroit can do this, public health officials asking, why can't we be doing it everywhere?
And Heidi, I mean, keeping kids safe in school has become a hot button issue, at least some of the ways that people want to try and keep kids safe. So we've seen battles over mask mandates and testing. I know you spoke with a congresswoman from Washington who's been very outspoken on this issue. What did she tell you?
She said that there needs to be all of these mitigation measures, but that it's frustrating that we're not seeing more of it, that it's frustrating that we're seeing so many parents fight some of these pretty basic safety protocols. Here's what she said.
I think right now schools, a lot of them are in just this quagmire of a discussion or of a fight about whether to even have children wear masks. And that is ridiculous. That should be settled science, and it is highly irresponsible to not have every child and every staff member in a mask when they're indoors. Every concerned parent should be calling their school, and I apologize to the principals out there, but this is what needs to happen, is that the public needs to put pressure on schools to have surveillance testing either in the classroom, or send the tests home with the kids and have them do it at home so they don't even come to school if it's positive, right? You can do this in many different ways.
So even if public health officials and schools heed that advice, Joe, the question is how quickly can they stand up these programs? Detroit started working on this back in the spring, and now you have, after this Labor Day holiday, by the end of this month, 55 million children heading back into public school classrooms. They're doing all kinds of things like putting them in together for communal lunch. And public health officials say that could create mini incubators for COVID.
All right, Heidi Presbella reporting from the first day of school in Detroit. Heidi, thank you.
Let's bring in Dr. Amish Adalja for more on the latest COVID news, a senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Dr. Adalja, good morning. Always great to have you. I want to ask you about what Joe was just discussing with Heidi there, the return to school in just a moment. But first, I want to start with this new variant recently that the World Health Organization has been monitoring, and that's now reported in 49 states. Health officials in Los Angeles have even confirmed at least 167 people have it. Give us the context for these numbers, and how concerned should we be by this news, by hearing about another variant?
So what you're referencing is what's called the mu variant, which is a variant that was discovered in South America and is now spread to 49 or so states. This is still a very, very small proportion of the cases in the United States. One of the silver or bad linings of the Delta variant is that it's so fit a version of the virus that it makes it very hard for any other variant to take hold. It's important to watch this mu variant. There is some data from laboratory studies showing maybe it is more transmissible than other versions of this virus, and maybe it will pose a problem for monoclonal antibodies and vaccines. But I just caution when you see those kind of headlines, because what we want is clinical data, not laboratory data, because we know that the vaccines hold up when it comes to serious disease, hospitalization, and death, even against the most problematic variant. So I would say nothing to worry about too much right now, but it's something that authorities need to track and keep abreast of.
All right, good. So some peace of mind there for now, at least. Now let's get back to school. I mean, we have some concerning new data from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Nearly a fifth of new reported cases are among children. What does this tell us about the spread of COVID among those who are so young, who can't be vaccinated? And what should parents be doing as the school year gets underway and we head into flu season?
So the Delta variant is going to find people when they're unvaccinated. It doesn't care about their age. And it just so happens that children under the age of 12 are ineligible to be vaccinated, and those between 12 and 17 have low vaccination rates. And children, because they're generally spared from severe disease, are back to most of their activity. So that's why these Delta variant cases are occurring in children. That's why we're seeing this uptick in kids. What's important is to remember, again, that this is not usually a severe disease for most children. There are some vulnerable children where parents need to take cautions if they've got a transplant or asthma, for example. But what we have to do is really be aggressive in schools with testing, with having appropriate quarantine measures, and really using masks in a way that's necessary when there's high community spread.
Let's talk about another subset of back to school that is qualified for the vaccine. College this weekend kicked off the start of college football season along with back to school. I mean, we've seen these games where thousands of students, look at these pictures, are packed into stadiums to cheer on their school with no masks, no social distancing. And many of these schools, though some do, but many don't have a vaccination or mask protocol in place. Are you concerned that games like this and the return events like this on college campuses will become super spreader events?
It's certain that when you have high levels of social interaction without social distancing, that you're going to see some transmission. Usually in outdoor settings, it's lower. But in this situation where people are that close together, I think that the outdoors doesn't provide a complete guarantee against transmission. So this is going to be an issue for colleges to be aggressive with testing, to make sure that they have as many students vaccinated as possible, and to really stay ahead of these types of events so that they don't disrupt the operations of the university.
All right, Dr. Amish Adalja, always great to have you. Thank you so much for your expertise here. Today, Texas Governor Greg Abbott is expected to sign that controversial election bill, SB 1.
This comes after a months-long battle to get this legislation through the state house, which saw the state's Democratic representatives fly to Washington during a special session to stonewall the bill's passage. Then, when the same bill started moving through a second special legislative session, State Senator Carol Alvarado strapped on her sneakers and filibustered overnight for 15 hours.
And of course, this all comes as another controversial Texas law draws national attention. That recent legislation that bans a majority of abortions. Attorney General Merrick Garland said Monday that the Justice Department would, quote, protect those seeking to obtain or provide reproductive health services under a federal law. Joining us to break down the state laws making national news, senior reporter for NBCNews.com, Jane Tim, and NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley.
So, Jane, let's start with you and the election bill. Back in July, you're the one who first broke the news that the Texas state reps and senators were getting on planes to throw a wrench in the process. They delayed it, but in the end, it was the inevitable. It's finally getting signed into law today, barring any major interruption. So, set the stage. How did this all happen?
Yeah, Joe, this was the politically inevitable, and it's why Democrats went to such enormous lengths to try and delay it, to try and buy themselves some time. They said they were buying time for democracy and hoping that Congress would act. They knew there was legislation that could make a huge impact and essentially kneecap a lot of the restrictions in these laws, and they really thought that they could push the needle, they could move the needle. But the Democrats in Texas are a minority party, and Republicans knew that they had the upper hand in terms of votes. And if they simply waited them out and essentially smoked them out of D.C., that they would eventually come home. And they didn't even have to arrest them and drag them back to the state legislature, as they'd always said they wanted to. They just waited. And eventually the political pressure of a surging pandemic brought the Democrats back to Austin on their own, and they were able to pass this law quite quickly and with a lot of the provisions they wanted. There wasn't a lot of negotiating power for Democrats after leaving for weeks.
Now, Julia, let's bring you in here and let's turn now to that abortion law. So, as I mentioned, U.S. Attorney General has vowed to protect abortion clinics in Texas. I said under a federal law. Well, what that is what's called the FACE Act, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances. How would that work? What does citing that mean? And how much power does the Justice Department have here?
Well, the Justice Department is still exploring all of their legal options, including how they may try to push this in federal courts down in Texas, because this is not over. All that was ruled last week was that the Supreme Court was not going to issue an emergency stay on this bill. But the FACE Act is a small tool that the Justice Department has immediately available just to protect people who are entering an abortion clinic to go in for whatever procedure. It's supposed to physically protect people and property. That's what Merrick Garland is evoking here, and he brought this up in his statement just yesterday. But it's not enough to force abortion providers to be open. And as we heard last week from many of them, they were effectively closing most of their services because that abortion bill really stops any procedures from happening after 6 weeks of a pregnancy.
And Julia, anti-abortion rights groups are fired up after the Supreme Court's decision to allow this Texas law to take effect. But a judge in Texas has granted a restraining order temporarily preventing some lawsuits. What does that mean for the law? What's next?
That's right. So we're hearing from groups like Planned Parenthood that say that this still isn't enough, that they still need this law to be overturned. But this judge issued a very temporary, a very restrictive restraining order, very small in scope, and that it just means that this one Texas anti-abortion group cannot file those lawsuits against Planned Parenthood in Texas. The lawsuits were really the bulk, the centerpiece of the entire law, because it allowed private citizens and private citizen groups to sue anyone in civil court who might be associated with an abortion that happened after 6 weeks. So this preliminary injunction for now keeps that from happening. But we'll see oral arguments on September 13th. So that's another piece of this to watch. But of course, we're still watching what happens at the district level and whether or not when this case is finally decided in court and there are oral arguments, what kind of questions might come up, including how in the world can you enforce a law that is all built on civil lawsuits, not on any kind of law of the land being enforced. It's really something that could be copied not just for abortion, but across the country to promote any kind of political agenda. And so we'll see what happens next.
Yes, we certainly will. Before we let you go, Jane, I want to bring you back in here with a quick question back on that election bill. So it seems as though what's happening in Texas is pressuring Washington lawmakers to act. Remind us what the latest is with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act. Are those moving at all on Capitol Hill?
You know, they've both been passed by the House, but politically, the minority party in the Senate has a lot more power than the minority party back in Texas. So this bill, Republicans want to block it, and they've said they're going to. I don't really see anything moving. Democrats are desperate to pass it, desperate to pass something, any kind of version. I think they're going to try, but I don't see Republicans budging on this. I think they are very happy to send their voters to the midterm polls next year with some talk of election integrity and say, look, we fixed things, even if there is no evidence of widespread fraud.
Jane, Tim, and Julia Ainsley with All Things Texas for us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, let's get a check on what we hope is a much quieter morning News Now weather forecast.
Yeah, Janessa Webb is with us today. Hey, Janessa.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, we can always hope, right? I mean, the sun glare across the Northeast has been amazing. Sunny skies. Please enjoy it today because things are headed for a change by tomorrow. That's not the case for our friends in Southeast Louisiana, still dealing with a cluster of storms that are going to make its way into that area this afternoon, and it lasts for about 2 to 3 days. And this is wet weather they definitely do not need. They're trying to clean up in that area, and it makes its way into the Florida Panhandle as well. Some of these rainfall rates, man, they're about 2 to 3 inches per hour at times, but hopefully today, after this cold front makes its way through that area, things will die down. The better news for Southeast Louisiana, we're going to see overnight lows. They'll drop to the lower 60s, so a little bit of relief from all those heat advisories we've been dealing with for the last couple of days. Now, also for the Midwest to the Great Lakes, we're going to watch severe weather for today. We have a good chunk of people, 16 million people at risk this afternoon into your evening from Detroit all the way into Indiana under severe weather risk. The primary threat will be damaging wind gusts and a little bit of hail this afternoon. Now, this entire system, bad news here, makes its way north and east by tomorrow, and all the sunshine that you're going to enjoy today from Maine all the way down to Atlantic City, that turns into a good dose of rain. We could see rainfall rates up to 2 inches per hour. So today, guys, it's vital. Get outside.
All right. Yeah. Doctor's orders. Weather. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Janessa.
Yes.